I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messengers God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives.
Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today we have a distinguished panel. Today's subject, so I want to put this out there right away because I don't know how the audience will feel about this. We're going to be talking about pedophilia and ministry. So if you don't want to hear this, or if you don't want your kids to hear this, I wanted to put it out there right away. So my panel, sitting to my right, is Robin Duda, who is a Master's of Social Work and is co-founder of Sustainable Love. Welcome.
Thank you.
And then we got a couple of old-time favorites here. We got Bishop Daniel Dangarin next, who's of the Independent Catholic Apostolic Church of Antioch. Welcome. And Reverend Dr. Richard Murphy, who is rector of St. Bede's Episcopal Church. Welcome to you too. So today's prophetic topic is integrating the shadow and light. And this topic comes from our guest Robin's website, and that'll be flashing on the screen, so you'll see that. And the complete thought reads as follows. Sustainable love is a visceral, emotional, spiritual experience and frequency that is a result of integrating the shadow and light of soul and body into wholeness. So we're going to be talking about that because there's a lot of shadow involved with pedophilia, and there needs to be a lot of light added to it so we can get to that balance of wholeness. Mm-hmm. So before we do some brief introductions, what I'd like to do is just give a basic definition of pedophilia. Pedophilia is basically sexual abuse of a prepubescent child. So what that means varies because pubescence comes in a variety of stages. Girls roughly around 10, boys roughly around 12. And that's basically the definition of pedophilia. So, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but let's just, Robin, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody why you're here.
Well, thank you, Phil. I was really excited when Phil called me because I have been working with clients for 20 years that have had different levels of trauma. And one of the most difficult traumas that families endure and work through with me is through pedophilia with priests and ministers that they have trusted. So in my work as a social worker and a dance therapist, I really help families and parents and children understand how to heal their body, because the body holds the memory of the pain and the struggle and the confusion and the trauma. And if there isn't support for moving that through emotionally, a lot of children never have a healthy sex life. So my work is very much about integrating the painful places, bringing them to love, and finding a new way to see yourself as a being and new possibilities of creating relationships. So I'm all about relationship. My husband works with me, and we have a company called Sustainable Love, and it's all about learning how to love in the hardest of moments, in the most difficult places of our journeys. So it has a very strong spiritual foundation to it. And without the love from Spirit, we really can't heal. And that's what I've learned after having my own healing journey as well.
Thank you. Bishop.
I think it is all about healing. It's about wholeness. And this is what we are, hopefully, those of us who are involved not only in ministry but in life, we want to support life. We want to support growth. We want to help people transition through these stages of life from being an infant, a child, a teenager, a young adult, and hopefully a person of wisdom. And I think that this is one of the more traditional notions of what ministry is about, whether it's in a Judeo-Christian context or whether it's shamanism. It's about helping people grow and be one, not only with themselves, but with the community.
Well,
I come at it right now as a parish rector on one level, and in that regard, I see myself in my role as rector of St. Bede's as one who has to ensure that people who come through the door have a safe place, especially children who come through the door, that the church is safe. In my background, I've done a lot of work with reconciliation on a political and a social level, and I see exactly what Robin and Dan are talking about, that it is a process of healing. It's a process of coming to, confront the trauma and to deal with the trauma and to walk into a process of recovery. I'm also a priest who have known offenders and have known victims, and that's why I'm glad folks like Robin are around, because I'm the one that needs to turn to the professionals. So I come from an experience of reconciliation, and also one, you might say, of protection as a parish priest.
okay, one of the things I also want to put out there on the air is that I did invite the Archdiocese of Santa Fe to send somebody to this program, and they respectfully declined. So also part of my choices, especially for Father and Bishop, was about both of them having had some experience early on in the Roman Catholic Church, because, and I don't want to make this sound like this is all about the Roman Catholic Church, because it's definitely not. They're the ones who are out there. I think they put themselves out there in other ways. So when these kind of things happen, it rides on those coattails. So they're the most prevalent. And my research that I've done on this is that it's pretty much across the board that pedophilia is not strictly a Roman Catholic problem in ministry. It's just they get the most press, and so I just wanted to throw that out there. A couple of things I'd like to do. I want to go down to some basics because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. In your experience, Rob, is there a particular underlying cause for pedophilia?
I see it both in a very practical, what causes what, in a very physical, psychological reality, but I also am looking at it from a spiritual reality. And when I look at it very psychologically, anyone that has an impulse to sexually want to connect with a child as an adult has usually had that occur to them. There's usually been some inappropriate sexual play, either in a family situation that was denied, where an authority dominated a child, and that got imprinted into one's childhood. And as they grow up and mature sexually, all of a sudden these impulses are in their body and they don't understand them. Most often, a pedophile has denied their own sexual trauma. Most often, they have no reference to talk about their sexuality. And in some religious matrices, some religious belief systems, if sex is not a topic that is part of our dialogue, that is part of a healthy part of life, that people don't talk about sexuality, aren't comfortable talking about it, and you've been abused, then there's no reference for someone to say, hey, what I'm going through right now isn't something to hide. Most people that become pedophiles that I've seen, because I've also done healing work with people that have been abusers, they have denied how much pain and shame that they're carrying. So through that denial, the impulse grows to take action on another, to try to master the energy of being abused. They want to become an abuser. And for me, the only way I've been able to truly support that impulse to heal from someone that's been an abuser is for them to go back into their trauma and heal their own child. And it is not until they face that whole process of stopping naturally from the inside out, stopping the impulse to abuse another, is done organically then. It's done through the spirit, through the soul, through the true healing of the body. So for me, pedophilia is created through denied sexual abuse incest. It's most often found in people that have not been able to communicate and share about their sexual development and feelings as a child.
And from my perspective, we have a culture that doesn't want to deal with sex. So we force it further in the ground. I want to throw out to both of you guys. Both of you in your journeys have passed through, for some period of time, some connection with the Roman Catholic Church and then gone on to other places. So you have multiple experiences. In all the training that you've gotten, was there anything about acting out sexually, sexual training, how to spot people who might be perpetrators, for instance?
In my experience, I was in the Roman Catholic Seminary from 65 to 70, and the answer to that question is plainly no. We had no conversations, no workshops, no training, minimal discussion in those 5 years on even celibacy. It was just an assumed topic. We would talk about it off campus, perhaps among ourselves. I, fortunately, at that time, had a wonderful archbishop who we would sit down with in groups once in a while, but as far as within the formal academic training, there was absolutely nothing. But I just want to pick up what Robin said that I find intriguing, that the healing you're talking about is similar to that of a 12-step, where somebody goes, that the recovery doesn't begin till you confront that negative side of yourself in the fourth and fifth steps. And then once that stuff is confronted and dealt with, that's when recovery begins. I was just a side note. Thanks.
Yeah, I also liked what you were saying, because it is so easy to become angry and to become defensive of innocence. And though there is, all choices have consequences. There also is the important aspect of the criminality of this. But my sense is all of our lives are all aspects of our lives are about learning who we are and who we are not. And I agree with Father Dick here that I entered the seminary in '61, and I was in the Jesuits for 17 years. During that time, in our novitiate, we had minimal kinds of talk. It was mostly about warning, not to get into situations, but there was no training or understanding at that time about what do you do? What do you do about your sexual energy? What do you do about attraction? And what do you do when you find yourself in a situation where all of these very powerful energies come to the surface? Now, one of the things that I keep going back to, because I think this is what life is about. Life is about forgiveness. Life is about healing. Life is about welcoming people into the broader community. And it's not just on the level of psychology. I have a doctorate in psychology. It only gets me so far. Right. It gets me usually in the door. But what gets me into the soul is spirituality. We talked, Father Dick and I were in a panel a few months ago, where as we were wrapping up the discussion, the mystical came out. That is the place. I define that as the place of intimacy with God and with people, intimacy with ourselves. That is what every human being craves. That's what is the great testing ground and the great reward, because we want to be known and to know. And these psychopathologies, whatever you want to call them, interfere with that. And so we want to bring in our tradition, the energy, the light of the sacraments to nurture and nourish these people who did not get the nurturance, did not get the support when they needed it. And so they keep trying to undo those defective, dysfunctional patterns.
Can I jump on something he said?
And then me.
really, really beautiful your comment about really going to the mystical. The intimacy with God, the intimacy with Spirit, in my view, as someone that's worked with the body so much, if someone can't go into their own sensations in their body, they can't actually experience God.
Absolutely.
And this is where there's been a lot of teaching that confuses, especially families, about how to heal sexual abuse. If the body is seen as not the temple, if the body is seen as the doorway of sin, if the body is seen as separate from God, then you're creating this rift where sexuality can't be holy. And then if sexuality isn't seen as divine and part of spirit, you then have more opportunity to fester sexual abuse.
Yes, yes.
So, and this is probably some of the stuff you wanted to talk about with the abstinence or with the Catholic training. They didn't talk about what it means to abstain. But what do you do with those energies of denying your sexual self as a minister, as a being that's a spiritual being? And this is a big part of how I help the soul heal, because the soul also goes through healing in these situations.
Yes, yeah.
So when the soul really feels the trauma of the body and loves the body in its state of trauma, the trauma starts to heal, and then they experience this intimacy you're talking about. And this intimacy is really the secret to the divine.
It's beautiful. It is the divine experience,
Yeah.
which is, we call it ecstasy. And ecstasy, the root meaning is to stand out or away from. And what is it that you're standing away from? From the sense of separation and guilt.
That's right.
But let me just jump in here for a second. And I agree with everything everybody said, but to me there's one major obstacle. When you are getting sexually abused as a child by somebody who represents, quote, God,
Absolutely.
Right.
now you're creating a second problem
Right.
in the healing process.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Because God's been defined in those situations as tying this bad feeling to now the divinity. Then the association is this painful trauma, or often with kids that are healing, it's somewhat pleasurable and then it's abusive.
Right.
There's a little
Right.
pleasure and then it's painful.
So then it's
then
guilt
they,
and
well,
yes.
they couple the
Yeah,
pleasure with
yeah,
the pain, and then now this is the minister who knows God. So this
Right.
is what God is,
Yeah.
pleasure
Well-
and pain put together. I mean, it's very confusing.
You know, the thing is, actually, I think that the human experience is made up of this same patterning. Whether it doesn't have to just be on the level of sexuality. It can be on the level of materiality in general. It can be on the level of having or not having money, having or not having an education. The whole purpose, I think, of human existence is to get beyond any sense of separation. That's why the mystics, you know, my favorite story is that Thomas Aquinas, who was the great doctor of the church, did not complete the last chapters of his magnum opus, the sum of all theology. Why? Because he had a mystical experience. And when he had that direct experience of the divine, he said, there's nothing to write. There's nothing to write.
It's unspeakable.
Yeah. And this is the birthright of everyone in this world, to have that wonderful divine experience of total love. No matter what the religions or the philosophies of life, my sense is that's what it's all geared to.
But if the pathway has been through the religious denominations, and particularly in the Christian sects, which most of them embrace that concept of original sin that's tied into sexuality, then isn't that a mixed message?
Absolutely.
Well, we grow in understanding. And when you're wandering around, whether it's in the desert or the jungle or whatever, and a big bolt of lightning strikes next to you, you take pause and you say, my life is not in my hands. And so you project all of this negativity. You see, Matthew Fox talks, the ex-Dominican theologian, talks about original blessing, not original sin, original appreciation of everything. It takes a certain amount of growth and work to achieve that.
I think what Phil's implying, though, is that you're speaking about a true process of wholeness through spiritual healing and being in the body. which is what I promote and teach and support in my healing sessions. We're all speaking about a certain level of wholeness. What Phil is speaking into is, to me, really a critical thing to acknowledge for our viewers, is that much of the religious dogma promotes an idea that spirit is separate from flesh, and promotes a concept that if this is God's doorway, this priest right here, and I am just a subject to his desires or her desires, what does that make me? It puts in place a belief structure that makes it very hard to have those ecstatic moments. And yet, in the healing process, it's not until someone can find the love, the spirit of themselves, the power to love, and bring it to those wounds in the lower parts of their bodies, that they have the ecstasy. And the ecstasy can come through rejuvenation of the body, through painful expression of the event. And this is part of the difficulty of healing sexual abuse.
Going back there.
Is if you can't express what's happened, you can't find this spiritual aha moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
I go back to, I look at this historically with my training, and if you go back to the early centuries of the church, you had two figures. You had Augustine, who really gave us the concept of original sin, gave us the concept also of predestination. And then you had this wonderful English priest, Pelagius, who went around preaching of the basic goodness in the human being and almost what Fox would say about original blessing, and talked about self-responsibility, that we can achieve certain things because of our God-given humanness. And it's like the Augustinian side of the church won with original sin because, speaking politically, that's a controlling concept. You can keep people in fear. You can keep people in control. And it's not even until recent years, centuries later, that people are taking a different look at this fellow Pelagius and saying, wait a minute, there was more solid theology that came out of it. But I think so much of this also comes down to that issue of power, And the other thing I want to add also, along with the non-training that we got in the seminary, was that when I left the seminary, I became a probation officer in Massachusetts for 15 years. And we received no training on sexual offenders. And when they came across our courthouses and police stations, we were really reacting by the seat of our pants. And I left the job in '84, and it wasn't until the '80s that people started taking a look at that, and we started looking at that professionally and clinically. And before that, there was the suppression.
Yeah.
Let's not deal with it.
Suppression on so many levels.
Yeah.
Well, silence in this regard, whether it's talking about your sexual feelings as a young child, whether you've even been abused or not, just the whole silence around the topic itself continues to perpetuate the shame, which continues to perpetuate the difficulty acknowledging that there may be something out of balance or not. How do you even, as a young person, get to know what's normal and what isn't normal? There isn't a comfort zone in our schools and our churches around this, except they make it, in media often, sexuality is portrayed as just more of an appetite or an addiction or something to sell a product. We don't understand our bodies.
Before we go there,
we don't understand the sacredness of our bodies.
That's right.
And so much of that is, we can look at the boundary issues. And I remember going to a conference several years ago in a former diocese on when the sexual misconduct policies were coming out for clergy in our diocese, and a priest who had formulated a lot of the policies got up and she said, you may want to be one of the folks, and you may want to hang out and just be friends and just be like regular folks. Every Sunday you stand in front of your congregation and make the sign of the cross and say, your sins are forgiven. And then you hand the person a wafer and say, the body of Christ. You ain't one of the folks. And that boundary, but that boundary is based so much on a consciousness of the sacred.
Well, I just want to pop in here because I want to explore that for a second, because to me there is a contradiction here. I did a little bit of research. So pedophilia in general population is anywhere from 1 to 5% pedophiles. Clergy, they did a study, the National Review Board for the Protection of Children by the U.S. Conference of Bishops, Catholic bishops, they did a study and they came up with a number 4%. So that's right in that 1 to 5% range. So the priesthood is not, contrary to popular opinion, a greater place for pedophiles than the general population, which did not surprise me. What did surprise me, and the question I want to ask is, how does somebody who maybe not even know they're a pedophile, but they wind up in the church, how do they wind up being a pedophile? I mean, you're talking about the sacredness and all the stuff that's instilled in them as they go through the process to become a priest.
Well, first of all, I don't think they become a pedophile. I think when they entered that role, they were already a pedophile and a abuser, because, more than likely, because of past abuse. So I think they come being
Seeking
that.
healing, probably.
And probably, and also
Absolutely.
somebody told me too once in a study that was done, and I'm just signaling out the Roman Catholic Church because the study was done within Roman Catholic seminaries, that they found out that a number of the pedophiles that entered the seminary knowing who they were, knowing what their desires were, and knowing that the seminary would suppress those desires. Yeah. They never thought far enough down the road that after ordination and they were off on their own in a parish, that there was no safeguards, there was no protection, there was no way to suppress that. But they went there, which one of the things surprised me too, they went there with that consciousness.
Well, that's a very
And
good
I want
point,
to elaborate on it just for a second, because that's the National Institute of Mental Health. The typical offender is 97% of the time is male, begins at age 15. So you're right, they get into the seminary already knowing who and what they are. And the thing that really blew me away with all the statistics I looked up is the average number of molestations per pedophile is 117.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, you're right. They come in there and they think that the church, the spiritual aspects or the religious aspects or the God aspects are going to suppress this. Mm-hmm. Well, and nobody deals with them and says, here's what you got to do.
Well, the part of the problem, I think, is, again, there's a culture of denial. And so, you know, when I look at that situation in terms of seminary, I would encourage people to talk with their confessors and their spiritual directors. These are people who are there as resources and guides. But if you come from a culture where it's not appropriate or it's not safe to talk about your sexual proclivities, whatever they are, I mean, they could be the most normal and wonderfully heterosexual or whatever. The culture that I grew up in is you don't talk about that because you don't want to even open up that can of worms, because nobody is prepared, or at least when I went through, you know, and I went through back when dogs could talk, nobody wanted to talk about that. It was too scary. You couldn't talk about it.
And we demonized it also at the same time. So we're not talking about it, and we're demonizing it.
Yes, yes. And the thing about Augustine that I like is that, and I totally agree with you, Father Dick, that he was the one that gave us a lot on this doctrine of sin. He was the one that would send unbaptized babies, you know, to hell too. He was a big rake during that time.
Yes.
His mother, Monica, would pray that he would cease and desist from all of this sexual practice that he was involved in. So it's kind of like reformed smokers. Mm-hmm. You know,
yeah, exactly.
They become critics of every. As an ex-smoker, I remember going through that phase. But you know, his big remark that we always used to laugh at was, "Lord, send me chastity, but not today." So you see the framework that's. I don't think that Christianity, on the whole, has ever had an adequate theology or understanding of sexuality.
And I think that was the attempt of the movie that came out with Mary Magdalene's story. That's so, you know, top seller.
Right.
Dan Brown's work. To try to promote a different view of sexuality, of feminine power as part of spirit, as Magdalene being a possible equal figure to Jesus. I mean, that has been seen as blasphemy. But if you look at it as energy, And what does the feminine represent but the love of beauty, of the body? She can make babies, the love of sexuality. And for me, as a woman, trying to support people healing from the place of being suppressed sexually and not being able to heal their sexuality, this split in religion that God is father, is masculine, and God isn't mother unless she's a virgin, these concepts make it extremely difficult for us to find the place of sacred sexuality.
Absolutely.
And so we promote more pedophilia because if we have 97% of the pedophiles are male and most churches will not ordain women, then,
Well, I had a New Testament professor in seminary who said on Mary Magdalene he was convinced that she was a very successful real estate agent. But the sad paradox, I mean, just to talk about Mary Magdalene for a minute, is that if you look at her from a strictly biblical point of view, she was a very independent woman because she was able to leave her home, move around with Jesus. She was never accompanied. She didn't have to be accompanied. She went off by herself. She was the model of what Jesus was holding up as womanhood, but later on in the church, that whole reality, I mean, it's that dual message. So,
and this really speaks into, I think, something that you haven't asked about, but I'd like to jump into for a moment.
Go for it.
Around healing. When the abuser is masculine, particularly in a position of authority, and the female is the one that's working through her abuse, if she doesn't heal that, one of the family systems that the way that affects the family system is when she has children, she doesn't take notice of the inappropriate connections because she's in denial of her own abuse. So when women are not empowered as children to speak up about their sexuality, about what the relationship is with ministers or anyone in authority that has been a violator, if she's not supported by her family, then she has children, passes that denial down. And so here is a child that's acting out sexually in the home, and instead of someone asking, you know, like a mother, well, what's this really about? What is this child communicating? This energy is denied. It's shamed. Don't lift your skirt up like that. There's shaming that constantly goes on around certain behaviors that could be doorways in for a child to communicate to a parent that something's not right. And that kind of shaming that gets passed down from generation to generation also supports pedophilia continuing, not because the family creates it per se, but they align with it through
Denial.
Through the denial.
Right. Yes.
And when we have healing that's really successful, the whole family comes in.
Well, and that's probably because what we talked about at the beginning about cause and effect. You know, that this is a compulsive act, this is not a judgment act. But it's also the same thing with shame. It gets wired into our brains.
Our bodies, our cells.
Yeah. I mean,
it's an actual energy that has substance. When you release it, people smell different.
Absolutely.
When they get through it, some spiritual shamans would define it as entities would leave the body. I see it as energy that's been stuck in negativity, comes out, and it literally changes the way you look when you release this kind of shame.
Yes.
But short of the release process, which most people do not go through, because I mean, I forget the number, there was a statistic it's used, I think it was like 70% of all acts of pedophilia are never reported.
Right.
So you have a whole bunch of shame that gets passed down and passed down and passed down,
right.
And it becomes ingrained as, you know, within the family structure. It's like handing down, some DNA related disease.
It's in the DNA. Yeah. And you know, I kid people, we are not paid by the church, so we have day jobs like St. Paul. And there aren't a lot of jobs for tent makers, so I'm a massage therapist up at the Bishop's Lodge. And I used to kid people that I was the only priest up at the Bishop's Lodge. Now I tell them I am the bishop of the Bishop's Lodge. And why have you come to the altar of the bishop to be anointed with holy oil? It is a great sacramental ministry that I participate in. They don't have to know any of that. But I also kid my congregation, I've never, in the course of my, well, I've been ordained a priest 37 years, and it's coming up 50 years for my entrance into the Jesuits, but I've never had anybody moan and groan when I explain and define a dogma or a doctrine. But let me touch you. All I have to do is this. And the person doesn't respond to me, they allow themselves to come in touch with the wonder and the beauty within them. I say, it feels good because that's your goodness. Once we've taken all of that stuff that's piled on top of you, usually by other people, then you are free to breathe. And it is the breath. You'll know this. And you'll know it too because of the theological thing. We call the Holy Spirit, Spirit, but in Latin, Greek, and in Hebrew, the words in each of those languages really are the word for wind, breath, and spirit. Mm-hmm. So when a person breathes, and you can see them, everybody does it, when they release whatever it is, trauma or anxiety, they'll do this. Mm-hmm. Okay? That's the Holy Spirit. I will send you the Comforter that will teach you everything. It's all right here in our bodies.
The healing potential is right here,
yes.
right now.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we're all divine. And so what we're involved in and attempting to do is to release the false images, their persona, right, the masks through which these, you can call them entities. You know, in my shamanic work, they call them spirits. I call them whatever you want to call them. They're energetic patterns that are held within the body. So when people are angry or they're hurt, if they're angry, you'll see this. If they're hurt, you'll see this. If they come in touch with the divine within them, you'll see this. And I kid them, I kid people. So you won't have to go through life like this. You want to go through life like this, confronting and expressing and experiencing and sharing life.
Yahoo!
Yeah, keep talking.
Let's go get them. And I'm not even going to make a collection.
I mean, and I hear that, and I agree with that. But my response to that, and Robin, maybe you could shed some light on this. I mean, I work with people, and I've worked with people of all forms of abuse. That process is not spontaneous. It's not instantaneous. It's a long period of time. And during that time, that counter voice inside of them keeps trying to negate the work that the healer is working on with them.
Right, right.
You know, so I mean, I'm not saying this can't be done, but I want to also give this, you know, it's not like, you know, I'm going to lay hands on somebody and here I am. You
But
know, it's an ongoing process that somebody has to be willingly engaged in.
Yeah.
Well, this really speaks to the work that my husband and I have developed because of so many trials and tribulations of successes and non-successes. What actually does help someone heal, what we have found is personal responsibility at a level for what is happening in one's life that most people don't believe they even have.
Right.
And because we go to the spiritual planes for responsibility, we're looking to how the soul somehow needed to go through this experience for its learning. And this is not a popular concept.
Right.
In the New Age movement, they call it you create your own reality.
Yeah.
Well, the problem that I've had with telling people they just create their own reality is what most people do is go, well, I'm really a jerk. Why would I create that stupid drama? And they go into blame. They go into self-criticism. And with that attitude, you can't ever open into love for why you created something in this drama on a spiritual plane to learn something.
Right.
So taking personal responsibility has to be part of the journey. It has to be the most significant commitment someone makes to at least heal their body and to become a different kind of person that was then the perpetrator put into them. That they are responsible for who they are, how they feel about themselves, whether they keep creating their drama, their pain, their suffering, or if they actually take that doorway you're speaking into and allowing healing to happen. And whether you see it as a soul learning or not, you can at least take personal responsibility for what you do, how you feel, what you say, how you are in the world, And when you've been abused,
Right.
you have to really want that really bad to get out of the victim consciousness.
And it takes time, and
Yes,
there are stages of development, and people do not realize that, and we don't tell them enough about that. And there can be a small child there. There can be a teenager. You have to get them to the place where, or you not get them, but you support them, you accompany them to the next level of integration. And it's all, that's what I love about the Eastern way of approaching reality, because it's not based on worship or faith. It's based on very pragmatic and practical techniques to move you up the ladder of evolution and consciousness. And, we all know, you can't go to somebody that's just been mugged in the parking lot and say, you created this. No, you can't do that.
That's
you
not
gotta
the stage
be,
they're in.
yeah, you have to be with them. You have to be compassionate. You have to be comforting. You have to stand back, especially if it's a woman that's been assaulted and you're a male figure. You don't go over there and let me hold you. That's not what they need right now. They need space. They may need a team of people to come and help them move through the incredible trauma of the moment into a deeper and better place.
And
Psychology does that even.
And we have a culture that is instant gratification.
Absolutely.
So I want a pill that's going to make me better right now. Just roughly, Robin, throw out a ballpark range for how long this healing process takes. I mean, let's get some reality into this.
If someone's committed, as I was speaking about, to take as much responsibility as they can for their healing, and with our process, we're unique, and we work spiritually in the body on a soul level, meaning I use some of my psychic gifts, and I am guided into the actual moment that the event happened, where someone had this imprint that they are a victim and they can't heal. So if someone's really committed to the journey, I would say about a year before they can have healthy sexual feelings about themselves, before they can have healthy relationships, meaning really turn the pattern around. And then the actual process to stay in a healthy communication, to stay vulnerable, to stay in a process of loving life, I would say is lifelong. And that's for everybody. Whether you've had trauma or not, it's a lifelong journey of opening and evolving. But in terms of actually getting over the initial depression, most people have high levels of anxiety. They're incredibly depressed. They feel horrible about their bodies. Women that have been incested or had pedophilia with a priest or a man of authority usually have incredible eating problems. Body image is a big issue because they take in the idea that I'm just an object. All I am is my body. All I'm worth is that you desire me. I have no value unless you want me. So when you take that kind of idea into your body, the thing that you tend to do is try to control then what happens to your body, and the only way a child knows to do that is through food. And so even people that have had incest or reoccurring abuse, we have seen success and a real turnaround within a year of treatment. And we have a whole healing team that works with us as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to get that out there because we're too focused in on, let me take a pill and I'm going to be better. And this is not something that we heal instantly. It is a process.
Yes, it is.
I think that you brought up something very interestingly when you talked, Reverend Phil, about the voices. Okay, when I was going through classical training in psychology in a state mental hospital back in Massachusetts, psychiatrists ruled the world, and they talked about voices in a negative way. And in fact, this one psychiatrist said, everybody hears voices. The problem is the people who are in here tell other people about that. Voices are ways that we have of interpreting and understanding things. In the past, or within a shamanic tradition, you will talk about entities or spirits. It doesn't matter what you call it, it's observable. And you can see people when they are listening to a particular quality of energy, they will change. It's
Yeah.
just like putting a mask on. And people are unaware of that happening. So I think it's important for us because I think, I'm sure you've had the experience, you're sitting there talking with somebody and all of a sudden they'll look different, they'll sound different, they'll be different. So we need to start talking with people about
These
those
energies.
facts.
But then
Absolutely.
So,
again,
and help them to discern. It's what Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuits, called discernment of spirits. Okay, that was a particular way of doing it. I have seen it so many times, and most people are unaware. And so this is the problem. They hear something, they feel something, they think something, and they assume that that's them. And it
Isn't.
it ain't that at all. But so we need to help people become mature in their understanding of their experiences and how the traditions, in many different traditions, have dealt with that experience.
and I don't want to be the stumbling block all the time, but you're talking about acknowledging the voices within, which is perfectly, acceptable in shamanism, and you get into Christianity, and they're going to burn you as a witch.
Some.
Well,
Some,
yeah, there's,
I think
I mean,
that's
we're
changing.
We're not
Phil.
going to do
But
that.
but we're not burning people anymore, but we still have that
Well,
stigma that
Yeah.
there's something wrong
I
with you, that these voices are not healthy. They're,
I
Some
wanna
of them are not, and some of them are, and that's why you need to discern.
And this to me really goes back into how do we define God? How do we define spirit? How do we understand energy? Does energy exist outside of our body? Does energy affect our body? Do our thoughts affect our life? This is almost how does life work 101. We've been exploring it as spiritual teachers, as healers, and as counselors. We've been exploring this deeply, but it's not common knowledge, and yet it's in the media. It is coming out on television more and more, like the Psychic Network channel,
yeah.
all this kind of stuff, but it's not seen as an education.
It's been deep within the human tradition
Yeah.
in many, many places. You go to a shaman and you ask for prayers, or you have a difficulty. Within the kahuna tradition, the Polynesian Hawaiian tradition of shamanism that I was ordained into, you come to a kahuna and you have a presenting problem. What the kahuna will ask you is, so what do you feel guilty about? What have you done that makes you feel guilty? Because if you're guilty, you're going to make yourself be punished.
You're going to bring punishment to you. You're going to experience life as a punishment. You can get ill that way very easily.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So this is the heart of and the, if you will, another aspect of the mysticism. Because mysticism, again, is how do we experience our intimacy, our relationship, our meaning with the divine and with the human.
we're going to be running down on time, and there's so many things I
That
want to
was a showstopper,
explore.
Dan.
No, I mean, one thing I want to get out there, and doesn't need to have a discussion. I want to get over to put out there to get past the notion that pedophilia and homosexuality are the same.
oh, no.
They are
that's-
not.
Yeah, they are not.
So I wanted to
throw
put
that
that
off
out
the
there.
table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's start rolling. I mean, we've talked about the healing of the victims. What do we do for the pedophiles? Can we screen for them? Should we be screening for them?
I think that's a great question.
Well, just from, again, going back to my role as a parish priest, we do record checks on staff when they're hired. We're conscious of it. Everyone on the staff goes through training, sexual ethics training, sexual misconduct training, and it's taught by a clinical psychologist. I mean, we take practical steps. And we, in what I like to say, the God business, we're in the business of transformation. We're in the business of conversion. And I think that we would all agree that we would hope for the conversion and the transformation of the offender as well as the victim. And that's why I don't, for instance, at St. Bede's, we don't banish anybody from the table, anybody from the sacrament. If the case arises where we're aware of somebody or I'm aware of somebody, sure, you set limitations, even to the point of you can come to Mass and that's it. But through the sacraments, like Dan was talking about, they're as much of a vehicle for transformation and conversion as they are for a consciousness of realizing your own sacredness. So there's a lot of
you
stuff.
have a process of really helping people start to look at this issue that become a part of your congregation.
If I come across this, I refer them to you.
Very good.
I want your number afterwards. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm a priest. My training is in history and theology, and I know my limits, and I immediately, again, going back to what I said in the beginning, I have to create a safe zone for those people that come in there. And if somebody does come across my path that is an offender, I'm serious. I pick up the phone and call and ask for help and tell that person that I'm not the person to talk to. I mean, I'll pray with you and do a lot of, but that's...
Yeah.
Is there a structure within the church for incoming priests to actually go through a full psychoval workup?
In the Episcopal Church, is a real serious process. You have to be, you go through 2 psychiatric evaluations before you're ordained. You go through physical exams, and then within the seminary itself, you're constantly being evaluated, and your diocese is being, there's reports go to your diocese. The Episcopal Church, and again, the gap between my Roman experience, which ended in 70, and my Episcopal experience in seminary began in 84, a lot had changed, but the process for ordination in the Episcopal Church was quite rigorous.
It sounds very different from
Yeah,
the Catholic priest.
it probably has gotten more rigorous as well in the Roman Church. I know that when I entered the Jesuits, I took a battery of psychological tests that pulled up stuff that I didn't even know about myself, and it's gotten too hot not to at least go through steps in terms of education and testing. But I used to do a lot more therapy when I was living in San Francisco and counseling. My MDiv is in pastoral theology, and I did a lot of work with clinical pastoral education back in Massachusetts. So my own personal bent is to be pastor, and I don't care who the person is. I tell people I work through a church. I do not work for a church. I work for the love and the light. And I think on some level we all do that.
Right.
You know, that there are no strangers in our lives.
Can I speak into healing for the pedophiles for a moment?
If you
Is
could
there
do
time?
it quickly,
Really
I
quickly?
want to put a little wrap on and come back to some closing
All right.
thoughts.
I think the biggest thing that I would want to offer our viewers and anyone that has been a pedophile or has the impulses or is afraid that may be so or has had this happen to you and you don't want to become a pedophile, is to get extremely honest with yourself and know that through that self-honesty, to seek out someone that you feel safe with, whether it's me, a therapist, or a priest, or a counselor, that you can actually tell the truth about your feelings to. That's the very first step. And to know that healing is available through forgiveness and through self-love for everybody. For everybody, no matter what.
Okay.
Amen.
Yes. Going to put a couple of things out there. Regarding the topic, there is a website, www.snapnetwork.org. That's SNAP network.org. And that SNAP is Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. And there is a wealth of information there. So anybody who wants to start doing a little bit of research, whether for yourself or for somebody else, it's a beautiful site. Also, just want to throw out there, and I almost don't feel like I want to do this, but I am a counselor. I am a spiritual counselor. I believe we don't heal without the Spirit. I don't charge for my services. I work on a donation basis. If you have any problems, any abuse issues, any life on life's terms issues, I'd be happy to work with you, because I really believe that. You know, the old model I don't believe works. I don't believe it really did work that well, and sure as doesn't work anymore. You know, without a spiritual component, we do not heal. One other thing, this is public TV, so to speak, and you are part of what makes public TV public TV. So if you got any ideas for shows, questions, my email address has been flashed on the screen, my phone number has been flashed on the screen, contact me. And I'll put it out there. I am looking for somebody to do a show with me on Edgar Casey. So we got a couple and a half minutes left. Parting thoughts. Each get 45 seconds. 1, 2. Who wants to? Robert, you want to go first?
Sure. I think the fact that you're asking us to speak into this is just a very valuable step to make this conversation more public. I have a deep faith and a deep commitment to love. And I work with people from all different religious backgrounds, and the one thing that I find common in every religious vow is love is the answer. And love doesn't mean that we deny what we feel. Love and anger can actually come together, because it's anger that comes up when we've been abused that tells us that something isn't right. So if we can love all of our emotions, we can love our experience and let it be the learning of our soul, I feel that anyone can heal.
Bishop.
We're all here to love one another and to offer support and healing. It's just part and parcel of what it means to be divinely human and humanly divine.
Father.
Yeah, my parting thoughts, ditto to what's been said, and that help in healing and recovery are possible. There are resources available, and the step and the road to that recovery, even if you can't accept the fact that you are loved by God because you are so deep into the depression and the shame, that you can at least begin to trust when you hear those voices saying to you that you are loved and that you can walk through this dark tunnel and come out on the other side filled with light, that the possibility does exist. It's real.
Right on.
Thank you, all of you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Hopefully this is informative. What I am going to do is, those of you who are going to be watching this is a tape show, because I believe this is such important stuff that we're talking about here. We're going to run this show for 2 weeks. So whatever day, time you're watching this show and you think somebody else needs to see it, that same day and time, hopefully next week. You're not seeing it on the second week, but the first week. Today is June 28th, so the first show will be July 1st. We'll be on the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 5th, and then we'll do that again the 8th, the 9th, the 10th, and the 12th. So, refer people. This is something that can be healed if you're willing to get involved. So until next time, thank you all. Love and light to you all. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.